Well, I spoke to Marianne Cusato about this trend of tiny homes in the US. She's a faculty member at the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture. And I asked her why she thinks more Americans should consider tiny spaces to live in.
Homes, especially in the United States, are enormous now, 2,500 square feet or more. Um, and it's a lot of space to heat and cool. It's a lot of space to clean, and it's a lot of space in many cases for people to pay for when they don't go in every room of the house. So looking at a smaller home is a crucial step to say what do I need? How many rooms do I actually go in? How much space do I want to live in? And the tiny home itself is a very specific thing. It's a 200 to 400 square foot building. That's not for everybody. But what is for everybody is to consider how much space do you really need? Would 1,000 square feet work? 800 square feet? And really assessing what's the lifestyle that you want.
So for people who are looking for this more sort of essentialist lifestyle where you don't really need all that many things anymore, talk about some of the growing pains, not just in terms of sort of the cultural shift, but also in terms of rules of regulation in making that transition to a tiny home lifestyle.
Well, the first thing is the key point you just made is it's actually not legal in a lot of places. There are minimum square footage requirements in certain municipalities for a primary home. We're seeing a lot of movement right now in accessory dwelling unit codes. The state of California is especially really getting behind the idea that you can build a small house in your backyard and it can help to really impact the housing need. We have a lot of opportunities in our existing neighborhoods to come in and put an entire layer of housing in, which would be almost invisible, and absorb a lot of the need that there is if you're fresh out of school and need a place to rent. So that's the backyard cottage, and that's seen a lot of movement. It's more difficult to find a place to build a small standalone house. And we're starting to see more cottage neighborhoods, pocket parks, pocket neighborhoods that cluster them together and build a little bit of community around this idea of smaller homes. There's a lot of success in that movement as well.
Now, we know that home prices are usually based on what other homes in the area are selling for. So then when you now introduce these tiny homes into the mix, what does that do in terms of local home prices, and how are other residents receiving this?
So there's a lot of misconception about what that house will do. We have a small, medium, large mentality in the housing market that doesn't cross over into other areas. If you're looking at tech, small is the best you can do in many cases. But for a house, we've somehow put in our mindset that small is poor, medium is sort of getting there, and big is what you aspire to. But that doesn't actually work. It's not so linear. And if you have a limited resources, you could pour the more sort of higher cost per square foot into a smaller unit and still be more affordable than that larger house. So it's not to mean that small equals cheap. And that's the first step that we really have to highlight, is that small does not lower your property value. It just means that there's fewer square feet for the person to maintain, which means actually they'll probably maintain it more so than a larger house. And it's separating ourselves from preconceived notions of what a house is to how it can actually live and operate in a larger community. So while there might be a fear that it's going to lower your property values, actually it's the complete opposite, in that it raises the property values because it makes the neighborhood more resilient to attract more ranges of incomes.
What are some of the biggest challenges that clients tend to come up against?
Well, there is a perception that it's extremely affordable. It's something that you have to weigh it against what the other options are. Everything's relative. The biggest is, one thing is just a primary misconception of what it'll be like to live in a smaller space. And you need to make sure, depending on the type of smaller space you're looking at, that you've really thought through that. There's in the US, the extreme tiny house on wheels with the loft that you climb up in. That's really a very narrow market. And the number of people that want to sort of sit up in bed and worry about hitting their head, that's an extremely narrow market. Beyond that, you get into some of these larger footprints, accessory dwelling units, cottage parks, that become really viable. But at that point, you still need to consider, how are you going to live in the space? Where do you eat your meals? How does the space allow you to entertain as you would want to entertain? And making sure that however it's built, that you understand what the cost to operate it would be. What are the heating and cooling costs going to be on it? So you really understand your total cost of ownership, not just what one piece of the puzzle is. Smaller spaces, it's essential to consider what your belongings are and how much closet space there is. Nothing makes a space feel smaller than clutter coming in from all sides. So you would really want to think through what your lifestyle is, and at the same time, make sure that you've accounted for the cost to operate and maintain, as well as whatever the rent or the mortgage would be.